This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Rodrigo Fernandez of website builders. Georgia. It's a word with countless possible connotations within rugby, and yet when we hear those two syllables smashed together, most fans of Warwickshire Brick Smash Ball think of the same two things. This and this. And maybe this as well, but let's agree not to talk about those people for the next 20 minutes, as if that's okay. In Georgia, the Georgian National Rugby Union football team are known simply as the Lalos, which is also their word for a try, a pitch, and a sport that bears an uncanny similarity to a gentleman's hooligan played by board games that William Abellis invented in order to showcase values to posh people, yet predates rugby arriving on their shores by centuries. But to the world, the Georgian National Rugby team are often known as a scrum. And frankly, there's kind of good reason for this. When they first rose up into the World Cup in 2003, just 12 years after the nation declared independence, their scrum was the one area where the Georgians were competitive with their more established rivals. In 2007, their forward dominance was a huge part of how they squeezed Ireland so close to what would have been the Rugby World Cup's greatest ever upset up to that point. And so it felt inevitable that when they did start causing those upsets, in 2015, their best performance at a tournament to date, featuring 2 wins and a rock-solid crack at the All Blacks, you gotta say, Georgia boasted, possibly, the best scrum in the world. Anchored by David Zorakashvili, one of the most underrated players of all time, the Lalos scrum smashed some opponents and weakened others to the point that their iconic captain Mamuka Gogodze could obliterate them on their own. Time was, Tongans found themselves at every club in France propping up the pack, but after Georgia demolished them in 2015, every top 14 team became all about Eastern Europeans. There are currently a staggering 38 Georgian front rowers playing in the top 14 and Pro D2, with an astonishing 23 of 30 clubs in France's top 2 divisions employing a prop from Gogodzeland, a figure actually down from 26 last season. And yet, whilst this might come as something of a surprise to the New Zealand Rugby Union, it is not 2015 anymore. In fact, I'd go so far as saying, in terms of style of play and approach to the game, Georgia, over the last 7 years, have changed more than any other test team in the world. And they could have hoped for no better showcase of this than their defeat of a, not that far off full strength really, Italia 2 months ago. A spellbinding performance that gave the Lalos their biggest ever result in front of an absolutely packed home crowd, in a nation where rugby is the national sport. Whilst this one result is far from proof Georgia are an all-round better team than Italy, what they accomplished is even further from being a fluke. To me, what we're currently witnessing is something I'd call the argentinification of Georgia. When Los Pumas first broke into Tier 1 circles in 2006-7ish, they did it with an enormous scrum, solid line-out, exceptional kicking game and clinical, sensible set of backs. However, the following World Cup in 2011 was something of a transition. The gnarled faces of Ronnie Ronzero, Mario Ledesma and Patricio Albacete were still there, they were still starters, but the backs division was starting to change. In came Juan Imhoff, Santiago Fernandez, Nico Sanchez, and look away now if you've got any Scottish blood in your veins, Lucas Gonzalez Amorosino. Argentina of 2011 weren't as successful as the 2007 vintage, but we saw shoots of growth in how they played their game. No longer leaning on a pack, with backs only doing the odd guest verse, they grew into a better rounded team until, well, by the time 2015 rolled around, Argentina had committed to the bit hard. That World Cup, Los Pumas were the only side who passed more than the All Blacks. They offloaded the most of any team in the competition, and their average ruck speed was third, only to New Zealand and the Eddie Jones Japan. They played gorgeous, rapid, quick pass rugby that used their traditional strengths as nothing more than a platform. Argentina made their second semi-final, thrashing Ireland, look at this, destroying Ireland, and providing the only true trouncing that year's Georgia actually saw. This is the path Georgia are currently heading down. They're currently heading into their Argentina 2011 stage. Following a pretty average showing at the 2019 World Cup, where a brilliant 60 minutes against Australia and a few tight tries against Uruguay about all he had to show for things, Kiwi coach Moten Haig left to be replaced by... Sure we left the coach around here somewhere. Despite knowing Haig was off before the tournament, Georgia reached the exit without a successor in place. Former Gloucester boss and coach of the other Lions during the period where they kept making Super Rugby finals and losing them to Kiwi teams by big margins, Johan Ackerman was offered the job but turned it down in order to take a much more lucrative gig coaching Nick Grigg in Japan. And so, with a game against Romania just 3 weeks away, Georgia were forced to scramble and promote then attack coach Levin Maisashvili to the role of caretaker head coach for the duration of the 2020 Rugby Europe Championship, whilst they searched far and wide for a bigger name to take the job full-time afterwards. And in order to make sure they missed no candidates, the Georgian Rugby Union headed straight to Squarespace. Their recruitment effort would require an eye-catching, breathtaking website no browsing big-time coach could ignore. They could lay out the job requirements simply, yet integrate all sorts of resources to give them the best first impression they could possibly want of Georgia. They could throw up images of Scott Robertson and hope he's vain and it sways him into taking the job. Integrate videos of Rolling Moore so that Warren Gatland, if he's just browsing maybe, would know what he had to teach them when he got the job. The whole lot could be done oh so simply. They could be integrated into Georgian culture and learn how to apply with easy social media sharing and integration tools to make sure word can get out there. And if you want to create a website to honeypot Jake White, you too can do that by heading to the link in the description and using the offer code SquidRugby to save yourself some money on that very purchase. But as the 2020 Rugby Europe Championship got underway, Georgia very quickly realised they could save some money themselves by calling off that search. This breakaway try, scored by the utterly evergreen Alexandra Todua, who's still going, I don't think he's ever going to retire, it's unbelievable, was Georgia's only try that didn't originate from a set piece inside 10 metres at the 2019 tournament. This, on the other hand, is Georgia's first attack under Maisashvili. There are some teething problems early on, which is to be expected in the first 10 minutes using an attacking system implemented by a coach that only took the job 3 weeks ago, but their patience and confidence is extremely evident. Georgia happily play phase after phase, with fly half Tedo Abzendadze pulling the strings, confident the opening is coming. He takes in here and the key difference then happens. Loosehead Nairashvili steps in to play scrum half. Fullback Lashik Hamaladze, often capped as a fly half, is stood in at 10 and invites the immense Gorgadze onto the carry for Lobzin-Nidze taking over whilst Abzendadze reassesses the picture whilst he's going to gain back up to his feet and seeing what's on. These next two passages are just about manipulating the forwards. A huge clump here are all forced to take it into one tackle and then again a phase later. And then this happens again. Hooker Mamikashvili plays 9 and Kavezaladze steps in at 10. And Georgia find a tiny overlap. Romania are scrambling to cover it, but Abzendadze resets immediately. He calls for this screen to conceal himself behind, so the Romanian forwards are so focused on making up the ground, they ignore the man and he can slice right through. He goes right through, but he can't finish it, but Georgia remain patient. It's kind of new to them as well. Lobzin-Nidze takes over and they run exactly the same pattern again. The ball goes wide, Romania scramble, the forwards overwork, and one carry later, Abzendadze slices through to score himself. Now, the tweaks to the Georgian national rugby team's game plan weren't exactly the biggest news to come out of March 2020, so maybe there's a reason this shift flew under the radar, but this competition marked a revolution in their rugby. The COVID pandemic did complicate Georgia's search for a new coach, but I'd like to think they just saw the potential in what Maisashvili was doing when they decided to give him the gig full-time later that year. Because a stagnant return to lifeless rugby during that Autumn Nations Cup tournament, which might have actually been the worst thing to happen in 2020, let's be honest, aside, Maisashvili has breathed such new life into this national team. The DNA hasn't changed. Georgia are still a side who love big forward carries and boshing it right up, but there's now this added subtlety and more passing. Look at this gorgeous mispass by Beka Gorgadze, right at the point of contact before flooding through ahead of play to get in support of his winger and take the return ball to score against Portugal. Or, in that fixture 1 year later, how, when everyone's expecting smash-ups, they instead go for this lovely interplay to allow number 8 Sotidze to crash into just an adjusting back and give him a cleaner chance of breaking contact, which he does. He goes straight through. There's this kind of subtlety being added to the Georgian game. Whilst they've adopted a rigid 1-3-2-2 structure, the same used by the likes of Japan and Australia, they often group the three together like this. There's a big clump of meat looking for individual inches. The moments where they play like a more traditional Georgian side are now done with proper exceptional pace. This try against Spain is still a succession of forward carries, but the pace is so much higher than what we were used to seeing from them in the World Cup. Here, Chukwueze clears way beyond the ball, meaning no Spaniard can compete, and hence nobody needs to ruck over, and they save a full second, and hence Abrazidze can pop it up with the defence still resetting and allows Gorgadze to crash over. However, the more impressive moments are the moments where they use their old school strengths as a launch pad. Italy halt them all here, but Georgia don't panic. A brilliant dummy line by Kavezaladze allows captain Sharakadze to find a weak shoulder and make a brilliant carry. They then try to go wide, but it isn't on, so they slot back into forwards mode. The team are packed tight. There's no real attempt at deception, but God, it's quick. What they lose in tricking an opponent, they gain in speed of clear out. 1 second ruck here allows Giorgadze to pick a great line, and look at that pace. Nine Lobzinize floods in to clear out, and the forwards step into pick and go and keep the speed up. It's so quick. It starts to slow eventually, but Lobzinize decides this is the time to re-strategize. And to this degree, this isn't the look of a man on a rugby pitch assessing what's on. This is a guy playing Total War or one of those kind of some bullshit online and contemplating his next move. It's like he's playing chess. And when he glances across, he spots it. He starts barking for the ball and the other backs explode into action. Because they're so forward dominated, all the blue shirts are watching around the ruck and Lobzinize crabs sideways. Kvezeladze runs another brilliant line but also calls it. He points wide. Meanwhile, Abzendadze floats in behind and these two players hold the Italian centres. Capowoodzo notices this, but not trusting his centres to cover a floated pass, comes up to cut off Tondura as an option. However, this opens huge space behind and allows Little Lobby to stick it on the boot beautifully. The bounce is absolutely perfect. It's an incredible kick that sits up right in the corner and allows the somehow still going Alexandra Tondura to pounce, ground, score the try that got this huge upset underway. It's a moment to show the team's new philosophy. Power played with pace, opening up opportunities for their new, incredibly sharp halfbacks to exploit. Here's a tip for anyone thinking of watching Georgian in the next World Cup, right? The moment Lobzinize starts to scoot sideways, get out of your chair, because it almost always leads to something exceptional. This try is a prime example. He's a player who likes to see pieces falling into place and exploit them once he has a full picture, and that running sideways is usually his way of waiting for it to do so. And his rival for the 9 shirt, Geller Abrazadze, is equally excellent. A far faster, nippier, livelier 9. He's allowed Georgia to re-inject that pace in the last 20 minutes of so many games over the last few years. But not only do Georgia have probably 2 of the 3 best scrum halves in Tier 2 rugby right now, they also have one of the quickest improving and fastest rising fly halves in world rugby. Tedo Abzendadze arrived at the last World Cup as a 19-year-old rookie, and whilst we very much saw his talent in that tournament, ever since he's gone up more gears than an ant climbing former All Black brothers who both played on the wing. This is tenuous. And after another solid season of game time in the top 14, Abzendadze showed us what he can do against Italy, scoring 2 tries. This first try is perhaps simple, but you can see his intellect on full show. It begins with a poor chase by Tommaso Menonfello. This is the chase of someone who can play wing, but normally gets fielded in the centre by his club. You can kind of tell it here. He overshoots massively instead of positioning himself to make the tackle, and it allows the other standout youngster in this Georgia team, David Niniashvili, to have a little run, but the moment he goes for the step on genuinely class international 10 Tommy Allen, Abzendadze, positioned here behind him, floods forward. It doesn't matter if he gets in front of Niniashvili now. He knows he needs to just beat Italians to the space for when this break is made if it comes off. Allen missed the tackle, and Niniashvili now has a clear run down the wing. And by being no longer a passing option for a few seconds, Abzendadze has now got himself into the inch-perfect position to take the pass. And his teammates follow suit. 3 further support lines from teammates appear, meaning there's no risk on him pulling the step, which he does, and he scores himself under the posts. One of the biggest improvements in Abzendadze over the last few years has been his steady patience coming in. He calls far less ball to himself than he did a few years ago, but when he does, it always seems to count. And indeed, his second try from that match shows it. Italy don't learn from the first score at all, and both Menonfello and Brex massively overshoot on defence, but David Niniashvili takes it brilliantly and explodes forwards. He's doing it again. He's really good, guys. He beats Capowoodzo on the outside and almost evades the cover too. It's a phenomenal run, but gets dragged down, and assuming this is the Georgia of old, Italy suck themselves in. They focus solely on stopping the forward drives, and they do come for a while and they do stop them. But then the reset happens. The new Georgia steps in. With 2 centres running dummy lines, Niniashvili slots in at 10, and Abzendadze fills in as the 13. He picks his line perfectly to dart under the crossbar. His rugby intellect just filling in the gap and working out what's needed instead of playing a kind of assigned role. He's a player who clearly assesses everything that's in front of him. Whilst Mamuka might be hard to forget, there's a whole generation of youngsters heading to France next year, and frankly, most of them already playing there already, who should be darting to the minds first for most fans when they think of Georgian rugby for the next decade. And Niniashvili joins Abzendadze at the top of that list. Lightning quick, brilliant hands, better feet, and once smashed Ibanetzabev in the tackle. Honestly, man, this kid is kind of a phenomenon in the making, and I'm so excited to see him on the biggest stage next year, joined by a cavalcade of others. I hyped up Beka Gogadze at the last World Cup an awful lot, but with good reason, because he's an absolute model back rower. He's everything you could possibly want. He's a Glidis is brilliant with the ball as he is over it, and fellow back row Becker, Sagihadze, went to the last World Cup as a 20-year-old and has steadily ground away since, now frequently excelling for Lyon in the top 14. Here he is, turning hospital pass into a try with nothing more than typically Georgian leg drive. There's also something very raw about Akatabazadze, but whilst he has plenty to work on, you put the lad within 10 metres of a try line and you're talking an automatic 5 points. At age just 25, he's already getting pretty close to Gulgadze's all-time try record for Georgia, and tell you what, keep an eye on him. Bloody rapid, he's good, he's quick. A lot to work on, but bloody quick. And whilst their attack was a huge feature in that soon-to-be eternally iconic win, I think perhaps the most crucial factor that changed in allowing them to beat teams like Italy instead of just giving them a scare was their defence. This summer, Italy saw a very strong challenge as well from Portugal, but they were able to see it out by relying on their maul, using it as a weapon to creep back into the game, eventually taking them clear. And indeed, when they faced other Tier 1 nations 2 years earlier in the Autumn Nations Cup, defending them all was Georgia's main problem. Like, to the degree that Jamie George became the first England front rower to ever score a hat-trick against Georgia. And so, knowing this would be a key battleground in remaining competitive and actually winning this game, Georgia find themselves defending them all on their goal line. A big improvement is needed. It begins here. Italy charged forward in the maul, but Georgia noticed Nicotera about to break off and sent all units kind of homing in on him. All 4 surrounding players are totally intent on holding him up, which they manage. It's incredibly astute, alert defending, but it does mean Italy get another chance moments later. However, they can't break it down. This is brilliant by Cheshishvili. He deliberately wheels the whole thing around instead of sacking it. It's kind of a risk, but it means Italy lose their balance completely before they can get moving. Sagihadze dives in the side knowing the ref will give him the benefit of the doubt, because he would be unsure if it's a clap maul or a ruck or whatever, so he just dives in the side to really bury the ball and slow it down. Once the ball is available, the only way to retrieve it from the ruck is for Nicotera to really dig in, to just kind of pound away at it, giving Gigishvili loads of time and a really obvious target to smash into touch, getting Georgia to the safety of half-time without conceding a point here. The maul defence won't get as many headlines as their newfound love for offloading, which already is not getting that many headlines, but it might be the biggest secret weapon Georgia have in their pocket to try and cause an upset against Wales or Australia next year at the World Cup. But if they're going to beat their recent bogey team Fiji, who battered them in 2019 thanks to Semir Andrandra, and then put them away the following year by a couple of scores, it's the other defensive improvements we saw against Italy that they'll be leaning on. A few years ago, centre Georgi Kavaladze scored this exceptional solo try against Ireland, and, desperate for more unserious backs for their collection, Gloucester offered him a contract immediately. However, Kavaladze was only able to secure 7 Premiership starts this season, as he finds himself competing for that 13 shirt with a certain British and Irish lion named Chris Harris. Gloucester boss George Skivington, who I think is an anglicised remake of Georgie Skiven, recently spoke of what a brilliant and coachable player Kavaladze is, and it's put in amazing context by the performance he's now put in for Georgia this summer, because man alive has that guy been taking some tips from his new mate Chris. This is the most Chris Harris shit you've seen in your life. Like, the only way you could get more Chris Harris is if he votes for Sajid Javid at the end of this. Italy have turnover ball and it's a proper try-scoring chance. However, Kavaladze plays an absolute blinder. He doesn't bother marking Rutzer, knowing the real threat is outside him. Most forwards in the situation instinctively just pass to halfback, a back, anyone they can find. He flies up instead on Allen, whose pass is pressured enough to buy Georgia time to catch up. He then baits Zanon into thinking he's drawn him, but easily drifts off and makes his way out wide, where Capuzzo and Padovani are both quickly running out of room. He makes a tackle, attack shut down, try saved. Look at the amount of distance he covers here. It's completely Chris Harris-esque. And here, he just makes a really smart decision to force Manfello onto the inside to make Italy's life harder. And his decision-making on kick chase, also exceptional. This is near perfect. And then come the last play, Georgia nearing their historic win. He makes another great decision to cut off all options and force Pettinelli into carrying. In many ways, Kavaladze is kind of this Georgian team in a nutshell. For a decade, the Georgian 13 shirt was locked down by the defensive prowess of David the Nightmare Kasharava, a player who built a reputation on doing his job extremely well, but never lighting a match for anything beyond that. But in his successor, Georgia found a player who applies himself very differently, far more willing to express himself with ball in hand, yet equally excellent in defence for very different reasons. Where Kasharava was direct, he'd hit you hard and press you physically, Kavaladze is like a painless needle running through your arm, slowly unstitching your skin until you're like, oh no, my arm's all floppy, half my arm's come off, all the skin's gone, and now like all the guts and blood and stuff's fallen out, and it's just like a bone. Now my arm's just a bone. This Georgia team is not just evolving, it's growing. It's a team getting better and better all the time, and that's hugely exciting / terrifying. In the past, Georgia have always been a kind of banana skin team. Aside, as a tier 1 team, you should beat, but you might slip over on. We've seen Wales, Ireland, Scotland, Australia all almost lose them in the past. Even the Springboks struggled against them in that first game back after the World Cup final. Georgia were a trap you could fall into. Most Tier 1 teams were capable of slipping in, but they also know they could quite easily step around it if they're on the lookout for the threat. What we're witnessing now, to stretch this metaphor beyond its reaching point, is their transformation into an actual, god, an actual human being instead of just a trap that you must overcome. You have to actually fight and could actively kill you. No longer simply a big scrum and big mamuka, the Georgian team preparing to take to 2023 are an active threat to almost everyone. And frankly, they've got quite a nice pool as far as things go. The repechage winner, no matter who it turns out to be, will be a team Georgia go in knowing they can and should beat. And then they have Wales, the most unpredictable Tier 1 side this cycle. A team who I could honestly see losing to Georgia then somehow making a final because PVAC. Australia will be a proper test, but after how good a game Georgia gave them last time and how they've improved and changed since, that should be a spectacle worth sticking to the edge of your seat for at least. However, the game against Fiji is the big one. That's a really exciting one, right? Not only have these two teams got increasing history, not only is it kind of clash of styles contest, I certainly really love to see at World Cups. Two teams that approach the game very differently, really going at it. However, whoever wins this will also likely automatically qualify for the 2027 Rugby World Cup. And Maishashvili's men will be looking at this as a case of unfinished business. This World Cup feels like it'll officially mark the start of a new era in Georgian rugby, a post-scrum period, if you will. And it could be that beating Fiji paves their road to Australia, which would be extremely symbolic. Last month, the president of the Georgian Rugby Union went on record to say he genuinely believes he will see Georgia win a Rugby World Cup in his lifetime, and he views his role as to do everything he can to ensure that happens one day. I'm not going to say Georgia will beat Wales Australia 2023, but I think there's a chance. By the end of the 2027 World Cup, that statement looks quite a lot less outlandish than it does now, and we may see the foundations for that shifting belief being put in place in France. Because whatever way you slice it, with 2023 on the horizon, the Lelos are about to give us an awful lot more memories to associate with the word Georgia than just a scrum. Thank you for watching that. I really hope you enjoyed it. It's been a long time coming. It was something I wanted to do anyway. This is the start of the second video in a series concerning the England Eddie Jones one on every team in the World Cup, the Men's World Cup coming up in less than a year now. So the idea is I'm going to run through every team. I am also going to do the same for the Women's World Cup in the week leading into that tournament, so that's coming up very soon. Those are the kind of focuses at the minute. I am going to try and cover more of the Rugby Championship, but it's been absurdly busy and I've had a lot going on around this and everything as well. There's also the podcast, which is looking at the 1987 Rugby World Cup. Speaking of World Cups, we're now on to the knockout stage. We did an episode with Paul Williams, the rugby writer, who I'm sure many people are familiar with. Fantastic episode looking at the Australia-France semi-final, which is one of the best World Cup games there's ever been. And we're going to be looking at the final. That video will be... That podcast will be with you very soon. There's plenty more going on. Yeah, I'm going to try and cover more of the Rugby Championship, but it's all chaotic and hectic and all over the place before we shift into the Women's World Cup coming up very soon. But in the meantime, I want to leave you with a real treat. This is a major Georgian sports talk show and how they celebrated the win over Italy earlier this year.
Lelo da he, aha mi wachziet misans, armi guirebt, asse gisamt. Armi guirebt, asse gisamt. Kamate, matiohi, mei,
Abatolo, kamate, ჩვენი გამარჯვების ხაკა. აჰა.